It's official. Timberborn has finally released. 1.0 has brought with it many changes, though a lot are only relevant to new maps, such as geothermal vents and unstable cores. And with pre-existing maps, there are still a variety of new features, such as banners, spiral staircases, and new water mechanics. But let's be honest here, you don't care about any of that, do you? Because all of that is overshadowed by one massive, completely paradigm-shifting gameplay change. Automation. That's right, the Hubble sluice has been ritualistically sacrificed to give us full-blown automation. Want to use water level to control floodgates rather than sluices? You can do that. Want to pause your lumber mills when your wood stocks get too low? You can do that too. Want to make a full-blown computer so that your beavers can play Doom in Timberborn? I have no idea if you can actually do that, but I know someone out there will try. In this multi-part 1.0 addendum to the Timberborn Beginner Survival Guide, we'll incorporate these new mechanics to automate Throttling. Today, we're going to go over the basics, exploring the way we can use the variety of triggers and connections to automate our dams and further optimize our bot production. Since it's launch day, I'll also go over the less game-changing additions to make sure Throttling still lives up to its ideals in 1.0. Hello, and welcome back to Throttling. Timberborn is a full game now, so that means you can finally get your friend who will not buy early access games to check it out. And it also means that we have a lot of new features to go over, and also, please ignore all this flooding. We will be taking care of that in this episode. But I know the thing that most people are here for is going to be automation. Mostly because I already know what I'm going to title the video. And as someone who completed 2/3 of a computer science degree, there's finally a topic in Timberborn that I may actually be quote-unquote qualified to talk about. So let's get right into it. So to start us off today, we'll come down to the aptly named Automation tab, and we will see a lot of options. Now, I'm not going to be going over every single one of these today because today I'm going to be more focusing on the basics of how you automate and not so much the advanced things you can do with automation. So I'm going to try to leave the complicated things like memory or relays for another video. But if you're going to automate anything, you're going to need a way for the game to tell what's going on, essentially. And that is where sensors come in. But at our most basic, we have the lever. So that is going to be the first option here. It is 50 science points, 1 plank, 2 gears. We can build it right here. And levers are very simple. They just have a switch on and a switch off. They also have 2 extra options, being the spring return, which makes the switch on immediately go back to off. And then they have pinned, which does something, and I'm not aware what. And we will see that if the lever is switched on, the light on top will turn on. If it is switched off, the light will be off. So the lever is the most basic functionality there, and of course, doesn't really do much on its own. It's just a manual switch for you to turn off and on. But down here under automation, we have a lot more options than just a lever. As we continue to go to the right, we have relays. Again, we'll be covering that the next video. Then we have flow sensors, which are 100 science, 6 planks, 4 gears. Depth sensors, which are 200 science, 4 gears, 8 scrap. Contamination sensors, which are 400 science, 8 gears, 8 metal. Chronometers, or chronometer, which is 150 science, 8 planks, and 6 gears. Weather station, 300 science, 10 gears, 8 treated planks. Power meters, 600 science, 10 gears, 6 metal. Population counters, 200 science, 2 planks, 2 gears, 1 piece of paper. Resource counter, 250 science, 4 planks, 4 gears, 1 paper. And finally, science counter, 300 science points, 6 gears, 4 scrap metal, 6 pieces of paper. Now, these ones that take pieces of paper do take a different material on the iron teeth than pieces of paper. I believe it is called metal parts, and you get it with metal. But now that we have gone over how much each of these cost, let's go over what each of them do. So while it may seem a little bit obvious from the names, I'm just going to go over the options that we have for every single one of these sensors, because some of them do get more complicated than others. Flow sensors, depth sensors, and contamination sensors all measure the same thing that the old stream gauge used to do, and actually the stream gauge itself has been moved to decorations because the functionality has now been taken up by these three machines. But they are all fairly straightforward. The flow sensor is going to, beneath this little outcropping that it has, will detect the flow rate of the water beneath it. And you can then turn it on or off based off of that value. So as we can see, we have this measurement here. It's currently at about 0.5 meter cubed per second. Our threshold is set to 0 meters cubed per second, and we are measuring for above. And so since 0.55 meters cubed per second squared is more than 0 meters cubed per second squared, this flow sensor is on. If we were to turn this all the way up to 0.7 cubic meters per second squared, the flow sensor would turn off. Now, as you can tell by the drop-down menu, we don't have to have it set to greater than. We have a less than, which will turn it off. We have a greater than or equal to, which means that if I were to turn this to 0.5, then it would still activate. We have less than or equal to, we have equal to, and we have not equal to. Both of these are pretty self-explanatory. Only turning on when it is exactly equal to, and only turning off when it is exactly equal to. Moving on to the depth sensor, it is going to be very similar to the old close above downstream depth functionality of the sluice, except the depth sensor is perhaps more open-ended. This is just measuring the depth below the sensor, and then you can move this up and down the same way you used to be able to on the sluice. We have the same options for greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, or not equal to for the depth sensor. And much like with the flow sensor, if the measurement is whatever we set compared to the threshold, so measurement greater than threshold, this will be on. And once again, that will be dependent on the outcropping there. This sensor can be any height above the water, but much like how sluices cannot detect above where they are, the depth sensor cannot detect above where that arm is. So just be aware of that when you are setting it up. And then we have the contamination sensor. Same greater than, less than, greater than, equal to, less than, equal to, or not equal to options here. This is, again, going to be just like the contamination sensor in the sluice. The threshold is all the same. All of that is basically the same as what you are used to if you have been using sluices. And then as for the remaining 5, we have the chronometer or chronometer. This we can either select a time range for the day here, with 0 being this part of the day and then counting up 24 hours from there. We can start at any point in the day. We can end at any point in the day. We also have the option to go by working hours or non-working hours. So working hours, obviously this will be on when working hours are set up here, and then non-working hours, it will be on when the working hours are not set to up here. So if we were to mess with these working hours, we would see that the sensor would change based off where that is set. Next up, we have the weather station, which can detect whether or not we are in temperate weather, a drought, or a bad tide. It will turn on during whatever season you set. It will turn off during any other season. It doesn't do much more than that, other than that you can have it activate early by about 3 days. So if we were to set it to 72 hours and set it to a drought, if this were to flash with that drought warning that we get 3 days ahead, this weather station would turn on and would otherwise be off. Next up, we have the power meter, which is not actually hooked up here. Hold on just one second. The power meter hooks up directly into a power supply, or I could have hooked it up into one of the buildings hooked up to a power supply. It measures the network power supply that we have. So for this, we have a few more options than just with the flow or depth sensors. First off, we have supply. So this is going to be making the measurement based off of this first number on the demand readout. We again have the greater than, less than, greater than, equal to, less than, equal to, or not equal to options. In this case, we have it set so that as long as the supply reads anything greater than 0, it will be on. We can also go based off of demand, so as long as our demand is greater than this number, it will be on. We then have 2 new measurements that we've never been able to see in the game, although they certainly have existed. We have surplus, so this is going to be measuring the exact difference between the supply and the demand. As we just saw, when all the wind power fell away, we went from a huge surplus to actually a deficit of power. So this went from on to off. We could technically have it the other way so that once we hit a deficit, this would turn on and we could do something with that. And then our last option is going to be battery charge, which is going to measure the exact charge of all of the batteries hooked up to the system. This one still has the greater than, less than, and all that jazz. But instead of being an exact number like the supply, demand, and surplus were, this is going to be a percent. So it is also going to be a bit more modular as you add or remove batteries from your system. And then I'm going to skip over our population and resource counters for just a second to do the science counter, because this one is very self-explanatory. It is just those 6 options based off of the amount of science points you have. And there is quite literally no other option here. It is just a simple measurement of science points. So for the remaining 2, we will start with the population counter. This has a wealth of options. So like before, we have the measurement option with our 6 options for measuring. This is going to be exact number based, so just be aware of that. This counter and the resource counter are a bit unique in that they have to be hooked up to a path. For the population counter, this is because we have both a district and a global mode. District mode will be based off of the district that the population counter is hooked up to. Global mode will be based off of the entire map that you are currently using. And then we have a whole wealth of options for what we are going to be measuring. So we have total population, that is every beaver or bot in the area you are counting. Total beavers is going to be every beaver in the area you are counting. Adults, children, self-explanatory, bots as well. Occupied beds is going to be this number up here in the top left, the beds that are occupied. Then we do have free beds and homeless beavers, which are going to be the next 2 numbers on that part of the readout. We then have an option for jobs. So this is going to have the option to count beaver, bot jobs, or both. I guess you could also do none, but I'm not sure what that will do for you. We then have employed, unemployed, and vacancies. That is going to be this number, and this number in the UI. All 3 of those options also have the ability to count beavers, bots, or both. We then have total workers. Once again, can include beavers and bots. And then we have 2 new ones. We have healthy workers and unhealthy workers. I will be completely honest, I don't know what an unhealthy worker means in terms of bots. But for healthy workers, that is going to be totaling all of the healthy workers we have, which for beavers will be uninjured beavers. For unhealthy workers, that is basically just going to be counting injured and contaminated beavers, anything that would keep them from working. I don't believe it counts bee stings for that because it doesn't make them unable to work. And oddly, it also does not count chipped tooth, even though that does keep them from working. And then to round us off, we have the option for contaminated beavers, contaminated adults, and contaminated children. And with the population counter out of the way, we have one more option for sensors. That is going to be the resource counter. This is going to allow you to count any resource that you have available to make. You have those 6 options. You have the threshold and the measurement. You can go by percent or raw quantity. And you have the option to include inputs, which I will be honest, I'm not fully clear on. So I figured out what inputs and outputs means thanks to someone on stream last night. If we come up here to our resources and we hover over logs, we see an inputs and an outputs number. Both those numbers are going to represent logs that we have in storage, in buildings that are not storage buildings. Inputs, very simply, is going to be something that is kept in an input here. So logs is going to be something in a lumber mill that we are putting in the lumber mill that we get out something else. Outputs for a lumber mill is going to be planks, but for, say, a lumberjack, this log that is sitting in its storage waiting to be picked up by a hauler and moved to other storage is going to be an output. So include inputs on logs is going to be including things that are currently sitting in a lumber mill waiting to be turned into planks. We do now have that for every single thing in storage. So that's what that means. And for whatever reason, you only get that option with quantity and not with percent. And I could not tell you why. And I do just want to mention that you can copy these directly with the new copy feature and get the exact same options on the new one as the old one. That is not as useful with sensors, but it will be very useful with some of the stuff later on down the line. But that is the totality of sensors in the game and options for what you can have it automatically detect. So with that in mind, let's move on to putting that into practice with the basics of automation. I've been doing some thinking about what could be the simplest, best way to show automation in Automatables in the most basic sense. Because part of the problem with this colony is that it runs pretty well on its own, given that it is just bots at this point. But that's actually what I want to fix, kind of. We have a problem, which is that, and ignore the flooding, we will be fixing that within this episode. We have a bunch of bots just standing around here in our town square doing nothing until they break down. Or until other ones break down and free up a job that these bots can fill. That's obviously a waste of resources. It's a waste of these bots' lifespans. Like as we see, this bot has spent 30% of its lifespan unemployed. It's eating up biofuel, it's eating up punch cards, and it would be eating up catalysts if we have any. So I think that will be what I automate. I am just going to do one small thing first because this will help with the flooding before we fix it. I am going to replace these dams with platforms, and then I'm going to lower this sluice gate to 0.15. We'll be replacing those too, but that should help alleviate some of this water until we can fix it. But on the topic of our beaver bots, so we'll come down here and we're going to use the population counter from earlier. I'll unlock it and place it. And like I said, this does need to be connected up to a path so that it can fulfill the district mode. We will not be using the district mode, but it is a feature that it has. Selecting this population counter, I'm going to make sure it's on global mode because I don't want it to be district wide. I want it to be map wide. Then I have a couple of options here. The easiest option would be to just go with bots. And let's see, we have 349 jobs currently, it looks like. I could set this 349. We'll make this less than so that this turns off if it's over 349. And then we could use this. The problem with that for this application is if we add any more jobs or if we lose jobs, such as by pausing buildings, this unemployment number will still be fluctuating. Now, in this case, in this specific case, it's actually what I want because I don't think I'm going to be adding any jobs. But if I do add any, I will have to come back and adjust this here. The other option I could go for this logic is unemployed. I could set this instead of beavers and bots to just be bots. And as we can see, we have 8 unemployed bots, and we could set that to 0 and again less than. So with this logic, this counter is only on if it has less than 0 bots unemployed. So that would mean that it only turns on if there are no unemployed bots in the entire map. Now, because bots that are working do break down, and I want those jobs to be immediately filled by bots in this center district, I am going to make this a few higher than this 349. So I'm going to make this 354, which will mean both that if we do add any extra jobs or if there are bots that break down, we have a few bots left over that are kind of milling about to fill those vacancies, but we're not going to have 12 to 17. But all we've done so far is set up this population counter. We need to connect it to something to actually have it do anything. To do that, we click on one of these bot assemblers, and then at the bottom, we now have an option for automate. So if we click on this, we will see the population counter we just made. And we can either click on it from this drop-down menu or click on it physically. And then what that will do, we'll see this blue pause icon on top of it. And I will unpause these just so it is easier to see. So when a building is automated, it means that this counter that it is connected to being on will make the building function. If this counter it is connected to is off, the building will not function. So if I were to turn this to greater than, so we flip the logic, the building turns back on. It is important to note that this pause functions the same way as pausing any other buildings do. So this beaver will have to physically move back to the bot assembler, and our haulers will continue to move inputs and outputs out of the building as if it is paused. So they will take everything out if there is available storage. There's a way we could avoid that if we really wanted to, and I'll go over that later, but it's not really relevant right now because these take so much time anyway that this small amount of time of stuff moving over to it from these storage containers is not really that big of a concern. So we will set this back to less than to turn this off. And now what we could do, if we press V while hovering over this bot assembler, we could use the new settings copy and paste function. And we could just copy this to all of the bot assemblers. Turn them all off when we have too many bots. I'm not going to do that because bot assemblers take 30 some hours to finish a bot. And I think we at the very least need one of these working constantly to make sure we have constant population replacement. So I will make this first one none. And I could then, again, press V while hovering over it and copy it to the other ones. But I do want 2 of these to function based off of this automation. And both of these will be functioning based off the same counter in this instance. So counters can be connected up to multiple buildings at the same time. And then I want this third bot assembler here to also have logic to it, but I want it to function slightly different than the other two. So I'm going to copy with B and paste this population counter, which will copy its settings. But for this third one, I am going to use that vacancies. So this one is going to be on if vacancies is over 0. So for our bot assemblers, we will have 2 that will control solely off of population. We will have one that is going to be a fail-safe if some weird logic happens and we end up with too few bots to fill the vacancies. That one will turn on. And then we will have one that is just running 24/7. I am going to, just because I will like the way it looks better, I'm going to make this one on the end that fail-safe. And here we will see a problem that we will encounter if we keep adding logic the way we have been. We have population counter 1 and population counter 2. Now, I know because I just placed these what they mean. But if I had left the game and come back 2 days later, I may have no idea what population counter 1 and population counter 2 are based off of this menu. Now, if I remembered which one I placed where, I could click on it, obviously, and I could take the time to check every single population counter to find the one I want. But there is a simple way that we could just avoid all that. What I like to do when I set these population counters, we can change the name of the population counter from population counter 1 to whatever we want. So I like to change it to what the counter is measuring. So this one specifically, bot population less than 355. Because that is the only thing that this counter is testing. It is on if the bot population is less than 355. It is off if bot population is over 355. So we hit OK. This one, I did vacancies. I meant to do unemployed bots is greater than 0. For this, we will also name it unimp, and I'm abbreviating because there is a character limit on these. I could probably spell the whole thing out, but I like to abbreviate for when it gets long. Unemployed bots greater than 0. So then if we come back here to our bot assembler and go to automate again, we have the option for bot population less than 355 and unemployed bots greater than 0, and we will set it to that. And I actually want that less than or equal to 0 so that it will turn on if there is full bot employment, but also if bot employment falls underneath. So where there are vacancies in the jobs. So I could have left it as vacancies. Actually, the way I had it as vacancies would have worked, but this also works. Unemployed bots less than or equal to 0. Now, the other thing that I had done without mentioning it, if we take this automation setting and we click on none, it'll de-automate it, so it'll just be running as normal. And so now we have one bot assembler just running constantly, 2 that run whenever the bot population is less than 355, and 1 that runs when there are no unemployed bots. So all bots are working, and we need more. And then there's one more thing to go over with these indicators. And actually, because I don't want to mess with the logic here, I will put down a lever just so that we can show it. So when these indicators are on, we can see that they have this very harsh white light that you may or may not like yourself. It is very visible if you are anywhere on the map. But if you don't like it, we now have this new option up here, which allows us to set the light color. So we have a yellow light, we have blue, we have that white, there is a green, an orange, a red, and then this final black option here makes it so that when it is on, it almost looks like it is off. These also have the option to input a hex code. So now whatever I typed in, this 123546, gives us this kind of bluish tint. So if you know your hex codes or you have a very specific color you want to use, you can use any of them with these indicators. I really don't like the harsh white light, so I am going to customize both of these. The unemployed bots less than or equal to 0 is a fail-safe, so I'm going to turn this to red because I want it to indicate that there is a problem. And this one indicates that we are approaching a problem, so I'm going to turn it to orange. Those colors have no bearing on the logic, and other people might have their own systems that work better for them, but that is the one I have been using and I have found works for me. And it's worth pointing out that that color also shows up here on the automation menu, so it will also make it a bit easier to tell. See, there we go. It's glowing that orange, and then this is also hard to tell, but it's orange there. So that can help if you have a bunch of different colors. It could also help you distinguish what is what on these menus. It is also very much worth noting that there is no limit to range on these. I like to put these indicators near where the logic is going to be happening, because that helps my brain figure out what is going to be doing what. But if I wanted this bot population counter to affect this lumberjack all the way, it's a forester, all the way on the other side of the map, I could in fact connect that up to that transmitter. As we can see, both are highlighted. That also means that you could take all of these and bury them underneath the map if you don't want to see them. I don't mind them being visible. I kind of like the visual of it, so I'm going to leave them out. But you can do whatever you want. That's the beauty of Timberborn. And with that very simple example of automation out of the way, let's get to automating our dam. So it is time to automate the dam. And I know what you might be thinking. Wasn't this dam already automatic? Yes, but there are two problems with that. Number one, as we already know, this bit has been flooding since the 1.0 update. A change to the water physics means that this will just flood over and over and over. Currently, later on in a season, this floodgate being open without those dams in the middle would be enough to keep this from flooding, but it still floods over and over because of the rubber banding that happens with water. I don't like that. Second of all, this dam pretty intensively uses sluices, which are no longer a thing in 1.0. Kind of. Sluices, as we know them at least, are no longer a thing. We now have two options instead of the sluice. So if we come down here to landscaping, we have a fill valve and a throttling valve. Fill valve is going to be very similar to what the old sluice was. It is going to have just this target height. So this is just like the old sluice with close above downstream depth, where it has a target height it will fill to, and then we have unlimited, which mimics the old open functionality of the sluice. And then this one can also be automated the same way that any other building can. And I didn't say it before, but that is going to be 5 planks and 5 metal blocks. I believe that might be what sluices were before, the regular sluice, but I honestly don't remember and I don't feel like checking. Our second option is going to be this throttling valve. So this is going to be 500 science points. It's going to be 5 treated planks and 5 metal blocks. So the throttling valve is going to be similar in function to the sluice, where it lets water through one way, but the difference is that the throttling valve has no automatic detection. It has a flow rate limiter. So the flow rate limiter is going to affect how much water can move through this at one time through the flow rate of water. It can be down to nothing, which will mean that this is effectively closed. It can then be all the way up to unlimited flow, which means that it is essentially just open in the old fill valve. And so I'm going to end up using throttling valves rather than fill valves for this task, which may seem a bit counterintuitive since I have sluices here that are only working based off of downstream depth. But as we build on the fundamentals of automation, I'm going to want sensors here detecting levels anyway, and I will want to be able to connect these throttling valves up to those and maybe have some more advanced logic. Plus, specifically in this downstream area, but probably throughout the entire dam system, these fill valves are going to be just on or off based off the target height, whereas the throttling valves have a few more options and can let water through slower than the fill valve would. Because the fill valve is just, if it is below this height, it is letting out an unlimited amount of water. The throttling valve will allow us to slow that down a little and hopefully fix some of this flooding. So I'm going to go through this whole dam system and I'm going to replace all of the sluices with throttling valves. The other thing I'm going to do while I do that, I'm going to replace every single dam block with a floodgate. Now, this may seem like a waste of resources or counterintuitive because I built these with dam blocks on purpose, but floodgates can be automated. Dam blocks cannot. I will not be automating the floodgates today, but I will want to be automating the floodgates in the next couple of episodes. So while I am going through and replacing the sluices, I may as well also replace the dams with floodgates. So I'm going to do all that. I'm going to add sensors to every step of this dam system so that we can tell what the depth is. And I am talking about depth sensors there specifically. I will get going on all that. And then once I am done, we will come back and we will automate this dam. And then this is going to be the one that has some devastating downstream consequences. And with these depth sensors in place, I want to move kind of quickly on this next bit because we have a bad tide coming in about a day. So as we know, we have measurement and threshold. If we set this to greater than or equal to, that is essentially what the old sluice, how that would function. So this will be on when the water level down here gets too low. So we can hook these up over here. And then we get a few options once it is automated. We get off, on, and reaction speed. Off, of course, is going to be what this is doing when this is off. On is going to be what this is doing when this is on. So I want this to act like the old sluice did. I want it to let water out when the water level over here gets too low. That's going to be represented by this being on. And then I want it to let no water out, so 0 flow limit when this is off. The other option we have is reaction speed. So that's going to be how quickly this builds up to this flow limit. And I'm going to set that to about 70%. Now, there is currently one might call it a bug, and I am recording this in early access, so it could be that this is fixed by the time that actual release happens, but there is currently, as I'm doing this, a bug that causes the valve, if it is set to unlimited with 100% reaction speed, to create a weird vacuum whenever it opens up, and it causes waves and can cause flooding in and of itself. So that is why I set it to reaction speed 70. In testing, I found that about 80% reaction speed will nullify most of that wave generation thing that it does. 70 gives us a fairly quick opening, but also not immediate in creating those waves. I will then do the same thing for my other depth sensors, so less than or equal to. This one I'm going to do at 225, and then I will connect this up. I can just copy and paste that setting from these valves, although I will need to again change the depth sensor. Unlike the old sluices, the actual depth sensor is discrete from the throttling valve, so the throttling valve itself can have its properties based off of flow limit copied. So I can actually go up here and I can do that to these ones and these ones, so long as I remember to connect them to the right sensors here. So this I'm going to set to 3.25. Going to set that to less than or equal to, and then I will connect these up. This I will set to 2.25 less than or equal to and connect that up. Now we will see that these floodgates are doing this weird thing where they're not filling up consistently, and that's the second thing I want to fix, although I will have to keep adjusting these flows as I watch what they are doing here. So I am going to eventually automate these floodgates, but right now I'm not doing anything with AND gates or OR gates or any of that kind of stuff. So I want a solution that doesn't use any sort of logic, and I'm going to do that by simply staggering these floodgates. So I'm going to unsynchronize a couple of these. I'm going to leave these at 0.65. I'm going to turn the outside ones to 0.85 and the inside ones to 0.45. This will mean that it is letting water through at different levels as the pools here fill up, which will help keep the flow a bit more consistent and hopefully help us deal with that flooding from earlier. And I will do that same adjustment over here too. So the last thing that I'm going to do as this bad tide starts, I'm going to connect this floodgate up to this depth sensor. Now on is going to mean that this is not flooding. Off is going to mean that this area is flooding. So I'm going to make off be the height where I want it to flood, and on I'm going to keep slightly below what this depth sensor is detecting, which is 0.5. So this should help keep this area from flooding, but also make it so that it does not just completely drain during a bad tide like it would if I had left this off. So once our water flow settles down here, we should see that water stops leaking out up at the top of the dams, and this is going to close eventually. Yes, there we go. And so this is just holding water now. Now, ultimately, this is not going to be the best solution because these valves and floodgates are kind of working in opposite with each other. So this valve is going to be open anytime the floodgate is open. That's not necessarily what we want here, but it is going to be the simplest solution until we get logic gates, which will be in the next episode. Or actually, the simplest solution would probably just be another depth sensor that is higher up and isn't discretely connected. So that'll be what I do. So there now should be a threshold by which these are off and this is still holding water. And there it is. So these sluices, throttling valves are off. This has not started letting the water out yet, so we're not just draining water off the map. That is probably going to be the best solution that we have for now. Again, as we get logic gates and then fully automate the heck out of Twotopolis, this will become a lot more sophisticated, but right now I just want to show triggers and how to automate things with them. I do, however, need to go through and rename these sensors. So this is going to be flood control, dam step less than or equal to 2.25. I'm once again going to change the lights on these. Red for bad thing happening, and then just yellow for regular indicators, because I think that is less jarring to me. And that is going to be the end of the logic we incorporate into this episode. So let's move on to a few more of the automation connected buildings that maybe aren't to do with the logic stuff. So the first of these I'm going to go over is going to be the indicator. It's going to be 400 science points, 2 scrap metal, and 1 pine resin. I'm going to put it right here. So this is going to be a light similar to our control structures that we have. We can customize it with whatever light we want. And then we have a couple of options here. We have pinned when on, which will basically mean that if it is on, then we see it over here on the side, which is also, I have figured out what pinned means on the lever, so we can see when the lever is on or off, and we can turn it on or off over here. We have pinned always so that it's not just when it's on, we can always click it over here. We then have the option for show warning when switched on. This means that if something were to happen to turn this on, we would get a warning up here that says indicator 1. That warning is based off of what the indicator is named. So if I named this, we're having a good time, and turned it to green, then turning this on will say we're having a good time. It does not affect the color of the alert. It is always red. We also have add a journal entry when switched on. So that very similarly will just make a journal entry up here. We're having a good time. And then we have replicate input color, which will mean that this indicator's color will match the color of the thing giving the input rather than the color that I set for this one. And then if you wanted to say use that to indicate when these throttling valves are going to be open in a more visual way, we could turn both of these on and replicate input color. And then with these indicators, we will be able to see from much further away when this flood control indicates, which will control these floodgates being on. So as we see, that pops on, and then these are going to turn on slower because they have that reaction speed, but they will turn on whenever that flips on. So that's just one example of how you could use that. There are much better examples that one could come up with. We also have the speaker. So this is going to be 500 science points, 4 planks, 2 gears, 4 metal blocks. This is going to be somewhat similar to that speaker mod that Mechanistry put out when they did the modding overhaul back in, I believe it was update 5, maybe update 6. So this allows you to play once or play continually. It allows you to be spatial or non-spatial, which is going to mean if it is spatial, it is going to be based off of how far away you are from it. Non-spatial means that wherever you are, you will hear it the same. We have a few default options: alarm, buzz, chime 1, and chime 2. We can automate that up to a lever. And then when we switch this on, we will hear the alarm noise. That one would make more sense to play continually. And as we can see, if it's spatial, as we get away, it'll get quieter until we can't even hear it over here. We also have buzz. We have chime 1 and chime 2. And then, much like with the detailers having the option to put in their own custom images, we also very similarly can click on browse, and we can put in our own MP3s and play those. I don't know why this is playing at a slightly different frequency than normal, but it is. All right, that's enough of that before I get copyright claimed. The last two options, we have a fireworks launcher, which has a second thing we need to go over. The explosives factory now has both explosives and fireworks. Get a little firework factory going to show this one off. So this we will set to make fireworks. And then our fireworks launcher, we have a lot of options for what the fireworks are. We have continuous launch. So that means once this fireworks launcher is activated, it will just continue firing off these fireworks until it is out, and then prioritized by haulers. We have options for heading, pitch, and flight distance, which actually does turn the little model, which is very fun. And then if we connect it up to the lever, we will activate it and watch as one of these fireworks shoots off and didn't actually explode anywhere. So that's what Comet looks like. Fish, I assume we'll make a fish. Oh. Maybe I don't know what fireworks look like. Apparently fish is just making the explosion at the end. We've got Kamuro, which looks like that. Palm. Peony. Sparks. And Willow. That one's impressive. And of course, just to show it off, continuous launch. Our beavers are under attack. And lastly, we have the detonator. This is going to be 1.4 thousand science points, 1 metal block, 1 dynamite, and 1 extract. But weirdly, this has to be put on top of dynamite. So let me just get something that I actually want to remove. And I needed to get rid of this ridge anyway because it is kind of blocking our outflow from the dam and is causing part of the flooding here. So I get all that connected up. I get the detonator. I can put it on a few discrete places here. And then just in time for the bad tide to end and us to actually need flood protection once they finish getting all these things built. As we can see, a few of these have detonators attached to them. We can just press our little lever button and it will activate all 3 at the same time. If we connected them. I keep forgetting to do that. And then we can press our little lever button and all 3 will explode at the same time. That right there is the end of all the automation features we are going to go over in this episode. So there are a few more additional 1.0 features I want to go over in Throttling before I end this episode, since it is the 1.0 release episode. Now, a lot of them I can't really show very well in Throttling, since they are map objects, or a couple of things for the Iron Teeth, like the new metalsmith. Now, luckily, I do have Siltforge, so I can still show you the metalsmith. If we come down here to metal, before we get to the point where we can make the smelter, we can make the metalsmith. This is going to be 150 science points, 30 planks, 10 scrap metal. It takes 1 beaver, 1 scrap metal, a fifth of a log, 3 hours, and it produces 1 metal part. It looks like this. It does not need to be connected up to power, unlike the smelter. Now, as I said, it produces metal parts, which are kind of the Iron Tooth equivalent to paper for the folktales. However, Mechanistry has gone back in and they've added the metal parts as a ingredient for a lot of older things, like the hydroponic garden now takes metal parts as opposed to metal blocks, which means, number one, it's used in a lot more buildings than paper was. It's also in a lot of the resource counters and some of the well-being buildings. Even the number cruncher now takes metal parts instead of metal blocks. And honestly, it's used so early in some of these recipes, like the oil press now takes 10 metal parts. And the oil press you're usually getting early to maybe mid-game if you're taking your time with things. So I think it's going to really fundamentally alter the way Iron Teeth progression works versus the folktales. And it kind of canonizes what people were already doing, rushing metal so that you could build these hydroponic gardens early. So that's a big 1.0 change. Let's go back to Throttling for the rest of them. But for most of that I can't show right now, I will be showing it in the series that comes out in April. And I also showed it in the Countdown to 1.0 series on this channel. So if you are super interested in those changes, such as the unstable core or the aquifer, I suggest checking that out until I eventually do a video on it. But what we can show in Throttling, the first thing, and the most game-changing of the non-automation updates, is going to be the addition of the spiral staircase. This is going to be 350 science points, 1 log, and 4 treated planks. The spiral staircase goes at a 90-degree angle. It can go either way if you flip it. It allows you to build very compact staircases that you could not build before. Like over here, this staircase does not actually go to anything. I could use a spiral staircase, and this would connect up this whole shebang. Now, this does not seem very impressive on its own, but if I were to, and I won't let them build this, but if I do something like this, you can see that it allows you to build spiral staircases that are much more compact than they were before and get your beavers up much quicker than they did previously. Another new change is that if we were to generate rubble, such as by destroying these valves, and we couldn't put that rubble away because there is no storage, rubble now disintegrates in 15 days in game time. So we'd not get in a situation like we had multiple times before where we destroyed a whole bunch of stuff and then there were a whole bunch of piles of rubble that sat around with one log in them for the entire rest of the time we played the game. We no longer have to make all of our builders pick that up immediately or risk it staying on the ground forever. Those rubble piles will just disappear on their own. Another new feature, and this one is huge to me, but maybe not to everybody. If we have stumps like this, we can now go to demolish resources and just instantly get rid of stumps. Now, it does not work for dead trees. Those still do need to be removed. But if we want to just remove stumps, they'll all go away immediately. So we can clean up those ugly looking areas that we always have that are full of stumps. We also now, under decorations, we have the pole banner and the square banner. These are both 700 science points. The square banner takes 2 logs, 4 planks, and 1 extract. The pole banner takes 2 more logs than that. We could put them down anywhere we like, and then the banner can hold an image. It can be any of these default ones. It can be any sized image, I found out. So if we wanted to put the most popular video I've ever done on one of these banners, we could do that, even though that is a 16 by 9 image. And that can be basically anything you want. It could be something that has transparency, like the Automatables logo. It could be something that does not have transparency, like this radioactivity logo. And that functionally just works the same as the detailer and the speaker before, where you can upload any file you have using the browse button here. You also have the option to flip the pattern in case you feel the need to do that. And just so that I can show it, the square banner looks like this. It doesn't have the pole, but you could put multiple of them side by side and they look like they're the same image, I guess. And then the final change we have is that if we come up here to our well-being, we can see that weather vanes now give a well-being score. I believe it is clocks, maybe, on the iron teeth that are the equivalent change. Or it's the alarm bells, one of the two. But that does mean that while we have a few weather vanes dotted around the place, we could always stand to add a couple more, especially in the farming district area where there are currently none. So let's just do that. And with those weather vanes placed, we will look and see that we have almost fully fixed our weather vane issue. There's also a scarecrow deficiency, but that'll just be where it is. And that is where I'm going to end today's episode. This, as I have said, is going to be part 1 of probably 3 parts that I go over automation. So this was just covering the very basics. The next 2 parts will be staggered a week, so the next episode will be out on next Saturday, and then the following Saturday we will have part 3. Of course, if you're watching this far into the future, that doesn't matter to you. But if you're not, and you're watching this as it comes out, and you just cannot wait, I did a stream last week on automation where I go somewhat into how it works, but it's not going to be as in-depth as these guides, but that'll do in a pinch for getting you more acquainted with the logic gates like AND and OR gates that we will be going over next week. But otherwise, the automation guide will return next week for logic gates and memory and timers and those more complicated advanced sensors. But for now, thank you so much for watching. Throttling will return. It's been a long time since I've gotten to say that. And I'll see you next time.